Okay, so I'm Julia Mossbridge. I'm here with Mark Rodeigher. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Is that right?
Rodeigher.
Rodeigher. See, already. And he is from CUFOS. And would you be willing to tell us what CUFOS stands for?
Right. The full name is the J. Allen Hynek Center for UFO Studies, because of course we named it after Dr. Hynek after he passed away, because he founded the group back in 1973.
Right, and he was at Northwestern University, we remember, right?
He was at Northwestern for many years, and Ohio State before that. He was at Ohio State when he got involved with the Air Force UFO projects.
Oh, cool! I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So he was faculty member at Northwestern when he by the time he came over?
He was a youngish professor. He was 37 or 38 when he got involved with the UFO project. And he did that, to be honest, as he told us, to make some extra bucks.
Yeah.
Because they came to the university looking for people who would be a consultant to help them evaluate and look at cases and see if we could determine whether there was an astronomical explanation or atmospheric explanation. Right. And several faculty members were not interested. He did not think anything of UFOs like, most scientists, almost all scientists at the time, but he had a growing family. And so he thought, I'll do this. He did, though, have one other key feature. Like a lot of scientists who, during World War II, worked for the government in the defense effort, he did that, and he had a security clearance still. And that did help him. It's not that they were doing top secret sightings, but there were some cases where it helped that he had that. And he also had that background. They knew he had worked for the government, and that meant that that he understood government procedures, better than someone who hadn't.
Right. And he might also understand why certain things needed to be kept secret and why certain things were okay to reveal.
Yes, he was good about being discreet until later, when he became convinced that UFOs were a serious scientific problem. And then and the Air Force, didn't agree with that. And then he began to speak out, not about anything classified, though he wasn't really seeing much of that, but he was definitely, he then caused trouble.
Right. Well, now time is on his side, because now the Air Force is starting to speak to that.
Oh, yes. Those of us, I haven't been in, that long, but I've been in a long time. And it's like the cycle is returning, because in the first year or so, when the Air Force was investigating the problem with the staff they had at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, they not only took it seriously, they concluded that UFOs were real, and that they were probably interplanetary visitors.
Was that what year?
1948.
Is when they concluded that.
They concluded that.
So then it was second guessed after that.
Yeah, well, the estimate of the situation is what the staff wrote, and they sent it up to the Pentagon. And the Pentagon said, we're not going to buy this. We're sending this back. Burn every copy of this thing. Eventually, they said, get rid of it. And they reassigned staff and reorganized the project, because they were so upset with that they had made that recommendation and all of that. We don't quite know why they rejected it, because there's nothing really on the record. People have done interviews over the years finding surviving people, but the point is it was rejected. After that, the Air Force, at least, was neutral to hostile toward UFOs all throughout the remaining time that the project worked, except for a brief period when Edward Ruppel was in charge of the project, late 51 through 53, because he was an honest fellow who worked for the Air Force, and he invigorated the project and was asked to do that. They did honest investigations and all the rest, but it still, eventually came to naught. So then, of course, the Air Force project ended in the late 60s. After that, the Air Force was very happy to be rid of the UFO problem. They were silent all these years. And now, of course, it's come back. But notice, it's not the Air Force, is it? No. That is on the forefront. It's the Navy.
Yeah.
And the Defense Department as a whole.
Yeah, well, that's because of
Right.
these underwater, our technology has gotten good enough that we have these underwater sightings.
Mhm.
I mean,
Right.
I assume that's why. That's
Um,
the story I'm
you
telling
know,
myself.
I mean, we know nobody in the field, not me, not anybody who we work with on any area, any level, any whatever, thought that something like this would happen. That began with the New York Times story in December of 2017.
Yeah,
And even after that story came out, it wasn't clear that this would cause a sea change for the subject. Obviously, it did. That the time is right. It isn't just that. Yes, it's the Navy and they've got videos and other data and it's military. There have been sightings before that were very impressive. So there are other factors involved, like anything in life that happens, that's complicated. There's more than one thing going on here that's leading to this, and that's a whole other different story. But it certainly is leading to this, including now, not just the military, but NASA
yeah.
being, either enjoying or being pushed, into looking into UFOs.
Well, so of course I'm of two minds. I'm very interested in understanding, you alluded to it, sort of the story about why now is a good time for these things to come out. Because what you're alluding to is the idea that the information was there before, but there's some kind of decision-making process around when to reveal it. That's what I'm hearing, and I want to make sure I'm not hearing a conspiracy theory or some sort of thing. I want to dive into that. But at the same time, I also, what we haven't said so far that I think is important is, what is your role in this organization? Like,
Right.
yeah,
So
let's just
yeah,
start
that's
there.
fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm the scientific director at CUFOS. I'm the direct successor to Dr. Hynek. He was the scientific director at CUFOS. I'm also the president of the board, but and so that means I run this and help make decisions about what we do, obviously in terms of research and all the rest. Everybody's a volunteer. We've had a few paid employees over the year, back to his days in the 70s and on up until somewhat recently. But the CUFOS, like almost every UFO group, almost is entirely run by volunteers, because there's no money in the field. Even today, with the great interest in UFOs, there's still not real support among the public for this thing. And in fact, any large projects that were done over the years, I mean, as in, not just a few thousand, but tens or hundreds of $1,000s, always done because of large donors, which we know is true in some other areas and anomalies, not because the public, put in a small amount of money that it eventually added up to a lot of money.
Right.
So yes.
So you're answering yes to a question that was not a yes or no answer, which I admire. But I think what you're saying is, yes, it's the case that let's go back to that other piece. Yes, it's the case that something's going on now where you have wealthy individual donors who are interested in, maybe let's call it disclosure. In other words, information coming out. Is that what you're saying?
That's say the last part again. I just want to make sure I heard the question.
Absolutely. These are important, critical words. So I'm saying, are you saying that part of the reason why this information is coming out now is that there are philanthropists who are very interested in guiding projects toward this at this point?
Well, let me start with this, which is something I haven't heard anybody say. Particularly the people who you hear, with new podcasts and Lou Elizondo and Chris Mellon and so forth, because they don't have a sense of history. There's no way that the UFO subject now, with the Navy and the videos in Congress, would be taken seriously and with such interest without the long existing history of sightings. So imagine instead the following. There hadn't been hardly any UFO phenomena over the years. There's nothing really. Okay. And all of a sudden, there's these videos that surface where pilots see and then they come into the public, record. What would happen? Well, not what's happening now.
Yeah,
Because
right.
everybody would just go, what do you, there's just these three incidents. Why should we, there's these three incidents, that doesn't mean much. But behind it all are thousands, tens of thousands of sightings by, reliable witnesses, including some cases with military witnesses, in fact, that undergird the whole phenomena. And so it's that lets us say, well, the Navy videos are the tip of the spear. But, right, but behind it is all this other stuff, that's leading the way. Now, so
Well,
that's yeah,
that's
go
number
ahead.
one. And also right now, I mean, what's you would also say, if without those sightings, people would also say like, oh, that's some interesting, fake video you have. I mean, now we have the technology to completely fake all of those things, right?
Yeah, right, that's
Right.
sure, they could be saying that. All right.
Yeah.
Now, number two, what has happened, as we all know, in the last 30 or so years, is that astronomy has advanced by leaps and bounds in discovering exoplanets and learning more about how things develop in the galaxy and the universe. And we know that unlike when I first got involved in UFOs, most scientists now would say, oh yeah, there's probably life out there somewhere. No, of course we haven't detected it. No, of course they're not coming here. No, they're not here. But out there somewhere, there's intelligent life. Well, if that's what science believes, and it is what most scientists believe, then it isn't that much of a stretch to think, UFOs. So this is kind of, interesting.
Yeah.
A related point, of course, is that NASA and the scientific community in general is letting the searches for alien technology creep closer and closer to Earth. Years ago, it was only SETI, and aliens had to be far away, radio telescopes, everything else. Then it was light signals, all the rest. But now, several SETI astronomers and others, SETI scientists, have said, there could be artifacts in the solar system. They said some of that years ago, but not in any way that was taken, to heart, let's say, by the community. But now people are legitimately saying that. There have been conferences on technosignatures, as they're called, and people have said, well, there could be artifacts on the moon. That's pretty close. Well, there could be artifacts in, Earth orbit, even maybe. Yeah, maybe even Earth orbit.
And pretty
Still,
soon, there could be artifacts on Earth. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's the problem. Here's Earth. Here's Earth orbit. No, never go down here. No. They got to stay up here. But still, they're creeping closer. Well, that again lends support in both the establishment, as I call it, which is politicians, scientists, professionals, and others, the media, and among the public, of course, for taking UFOs seriously. Finally, there is a factor, which is Lou Elizondo and others have shown that there were secret projects studying UFOs. So it isn't just 3 Navy videos.
Yeah.
It's that, well, wait a minute, there's OSAP and ATIP that were studying UFOs.
Right.
And so that's a totally new development. And so the media and others look at that and say, oh, well, maybe we should take it seriously.
Yeah, no, I agree. They all combine. And I'm grateful because as a scientist in a different field that is also controversial, I keep thinking about what are the models for bringing in ideas that have data, like the ideas that have data, phenomena that have data, but that aren't believed. And this is an interesting model. It's basically hitting on all fronts, and that's kind of the model that we're using in the world of precognition research. It's the same kind of, it slowly bring people to it and hit on all fronts. So yeah, it seems to work.
Yeah. Now I will say that one more factor, because I do believe it definitely multifactorial, is that the good work done by people like Elizondo, Mellon, and some others, the pilots themselves, who've been lobbying behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Right. So in other words, when the New York Times story came out, initially there was great interest, more among the public, let's face it, than others. And it wouldn't have gone as far, even though it was well received for the reasons I've stated, but it wouldn't have gone as far if behind the scenes, people that knew, where the pressure points were, who to talk to, how to talk to them, talk to congressional staff, other people, and basically said, this is a serious problem. Hey, would you like to meet these people? Well, I'll brief you on this. And other people were brought in as well. And they lent credence to what had gone on. They, and then they found a few congresspersons, who were interested and, willing to push this forward as well. So it, as usual, with political things, organizational things, you have to have that kind of a leverage, those kind of resources to push it forward. It isn't just the things I was discussing, sightings, attitude of the public, media. No, there's got to be concrete things happening, and then they did happen, of course. So here we are.
Yeah.
Which, in summary, by the way, where am I on the military initiatives? Whatever the name today is of the program, right? Every day it changes, but I'm cautiously optimistic. I'm actually more optimistic in a way for the what might come out of the NASA program than I am of the Pentagon military side. And that is simply because the Pentagon military side, I'm not worried about the history of what the Air Force did and so forth, but they're by definition, they're interested in military matters and defense matters. They don't do science there. They do military security matters. And secondly,
they do fund a lot of science, actually.
They do, well, that's
most
yes,
of the scientific community
right.
is paid for by the
if they keep it good, if they keep it internal, okay, even if they do good science, it will stay internal.
Right.
And we don't know what they're going to tell us about what they learn. If instead, sure, if they put grants out and people can get that and do unclassified work, that's great. But on the NASA side, we expect their work to be generally unclassified and all of that. And so that, therefore, if we find something interesting, well, hopefully we'll learn about it.
Okay, quick question before we get to some organization-specific questions to follow your line of thinking. Do you think that there are any areas in which it would make sense for information about UFOs to be classified? I mean, can you think of, do you have an interpretation of the data that suggests that everything should just be out there? Or do you feel like there are actual good reasons for that? I don't know the answer. I'm just asking.
I don't, there's the classification related to the, as usual, sources and methods. And then there's the classification that be related to what is discovered with sources and methods. And I personally have no reason to see why, with one exception I'll get to, why the information that is gathered through any channel should be classified. Unless a miracle occurs and the Russians or Chinese have some incredible technology that we're not aware of. And in that case, yeah, we probably should be classified until we figure out what to do about it. Okay. But if instead, they look into sightings and things and they say, it's not terrestrial and it's this, and this, and this, and it's got these characteristics and all the rest. I'm not worried about, releasing the information and then our adversaries and others, they know what we know. No, this is a problem that's too large. It's a humanities scientific problem, not the rest. Now, one exception though, and I bring it up, my colleague Alex Wendt, a political science professor at Ohio State, of course, has talked about how if in fact we got anybody, whether it's us in the UFO civilian community or the military or others, or the Galileo project with Avi Loeb, if we got evidence that seemed to be incontrovertible, that there was extraterrestrial technology behind some UFO sightings, should that be released? Should that information be released once it's in, because it's such an earth-shattering bit of information? SETI has protocols about what to do about evaluating information and then releasing that. Though I'm not sure that they go so far as to say, well, this is going to be earth-shattering and therefore we have to think about whether we should release it at all. But one can understand that there's a difference between, detecting radio signals and all the rest versus yes, that thing that flew, over, northern Montana, where we've got a great picture and all this other stuff. Yeah, that seems it's not terrestrial. There's some technology here that's not ours. That is an astounding. That would be an astounding discovery. And how will people handle it? I'm not worried about panic on the streets, okay? But I am thinking that it's worth pondering how best to handle it. So there's my long answer to, but in general, no, I'm against classifying and not revealing and all the rest.
Yeah, no, that was a good long answer because I think it's subtle. And I also think that when we talk about information that we think is earth-shattering, what's interesting is we're talking about revealing that information to other people, because anyone who has the information, their world has already been shattered, right? Their worldview has already been shattered if they actually believe the information. So one of the psychological things that I think we have to think about very carefully, the sociological pieces, is what is it like when one group of people has information that they decide it's best for the other group of people not to hear? How does that affect the people who do have the information as much as how it affects the people who don't have the information?
Yes.
It doesn't necessarily improve the lives of the people who do have the information, because now they're arbitrary, right? Like, it's an arbitrary selection of people who know the information. Are they the best people to know the information? No, they're going to have an arbitrary mix of, mental illness and capacity to function and personality.
Mm-hmm.
And so are they protecting them? Is the fantasy that they're protecting themselves by not releasing this information? You know what I mean? So I'm not saying this exists or this is happening. I'm just sort of thinking through the problem of the idea that, well, this would be earth-shattering, but I know it, so I'm not going to tell anyone. Like, maybe it's possible that if it's done in the right way, and I think we both agree on the right way, maybe it's possible if it's done strategically and communicated strategically, that the whole world could, I mean, I'm very idealistic, but that the whole world could stand up and say, with our various capacities, and say, wow, this is really hard to deal with. How are we going to deal with it?
Mm-hmm.
And by not putting that information out there, then a particular part of the world that's arbitrarily selected has to deal with it, which isn't necessarily good for them or anyone else. So anyway,
all that makes very good sense. So yeah. First, just going back to what I was saying for a second, till I expand on your points. Even if we need to be careful about revealing initially, let's say, information that seems incontrovertible, of course, in the long run, it has to be released. And in the pretty short run, it has to be released. Of course, I'm not saying conceal it, among a secret elite, group of which I want to be the leader.
Right. This is what I'm trying to get at.
Right, yes. Yeah. You and I will start that, and then we'll let others.
No, we won't tell anyone. It'll all be
qualify. But no, so that's that. So yeah, absolutely, information will be revealed. Also, because of the things that I discussed about scientific discoveries and so forth, I think people are also more willing to accept the fact that aliens exist and they might be visiting Earth and all the rest, particularly because they don't seem to be attacking us, doing anything serious and horrible to us, or planning anything, because they've had many opportunities for that. What if there's a group that knows this or knows some of it and is concealing it, and what's the effect on them? Yeah, there are another of my colleagues here at the center, Richard Thiem, who writes about technology matters and talks to intelligence professionals, and he was a pastor, has learned how troubling it is to have secrets and not be able to talk about them, even to one's closest intimates.
Yeah.
And it really tears people up.
Yeah, that's world shattering in its own way.
Right.
Yeah.
And so holding what I would consider to be the most important secret in confidence, that UFOs are here and they're alien and they've all the rest. If people are holding that, they're either incredibly strong psychologically, or yes, some of them may well have suffered real problems. So it's too big of a the existence of them on Earth would be too big to not tell humanity about, despite whatever disruptions would occur, because the alternative, there's no good alternatives to that, right? Who should know, who shouldn't know, whatever. I think we have to know, and I think the real, when you start thinking about the ramifications of this, let's look at this scenario, which is not to say let's not do this, but to say always, I always think downstream. Okay, well, if we do this, what happens next? What happens next? Okay, so someday we get enough evidence to say, yeah, there's aliens here, or there's another, we have to be careful, as you'll see, because there's another intelligence here behind UFOs with what appears to be technology. Are they alien? I don't know. They didn't tell us. They're just some other, other intelligence. Are they time travelers? Are they extra dimensional? I don't know. Okay. So, all right, now what do we do? Well, you get a million questions, a million things come to mind about what do we do now? They haven't attacked us. Do we try to contact them? How do you try to contact them? They're, what do we do next? Well, you can imagine the discussions that would go on. And what happens if, no matter what we do, they never contact us? They never respond to us. They're just here. And it's an interesting and somewhat discomforting scenario, because then you have these entities, let's say, that are here, clearly aware and watching us, but not wanting to interact with us.
Well, it just makes us feel like we're not alpha, which we don't like to feel like.
Yeah, well, the thing to keep in mind is that the universe is big, as they used to say in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, really big. And so, and it's old, really old. And so there's aliens out there probably. In fact, I'm sure there are aliens out there, and they're alien. And yeah, they may have 2 arms and 2 legs and all of that. I think, in fact, that's a very efficient body plan. And I expect that, that's pretty much what most of them would have, that it's efficient. But are they going to think like us? Are they going to act like us? What are their motives if they're 500 million years more advanced than us, which is certainly possible, easily possible, if they can last that long and not, destroy themselves. So if they're that advanced, why should we assume we can understand their motives, what they're doing, or anything? And the answer is, I wouldn't assume that at all. So it makes life both exciting and kind of, I won't say frightening, but very discomforting is a word, I would say, about the whole thing.
That's so interesting. So what I noticed is that, I just noticed these things as I do these interviews, and I only just started doing the interviews, but what I noticed is each person has their own sort of hope and their own sort of fear about what is the story here. And maybe I'm going to add that to my questions at the end. But that reminds me that that's a good question to ask. So I'll ask that at the end, and we can end up with that. But I think we've talked a lot about in the first half hour, just a ton of where you stand and where you feel the field is, and how it's built to this moment of disclosure, or whatever you want to call it, where people are talking about UFOs without being laughed at, or maybe they're being laughed at but then later corrected, or maybe the ones who are being laughed or laughing at them are being corrected. So we talked a lot about that and what the cultural issues are surrounding that, but I want to get to CUFOS in particular.
Sure.
And the way I see these organizations that I'm interviewing is everyone has a piece. So the reason there are multiple organizations that are science-based, that are focused on UFOs or UAPs, is that there need to be these. In other words, they didn't come out to replicate each other. They came out because each one's slightly different and has a different goal. And so I'm wanting to track those goals and talk a little bit about that. So I'm going to start with my first sort of formal question, which is, what is the mission or goal or objective of CUFOS?
Sure.
And also, when the thing shakes, it's because I'm also typing everything you say. And so that my computer keyboard is attached. So you'll see that. Sorry about that. We've stayed consistent with the goal that Dr. Hynek and the board set up years ago. The best way to think about CUFOS, we're a nonprofit and all the rest, is that
we're more like a think tank slash research institute. We don't have ProPublic members, never had them, rightly or wrongly, because Dr. Hynek was an academic and he thought like an academic in that sense. So CUFOS, number one, has been a place for people to report sightings, but more importantly, for us to compile and create a very, very large database of reports, which we'll talk about a bit. Number two, a place for reliable information on the subject. So for years, we published a periodical, we had an academic journal, monographs, other things that we've done, doing interviews, in other words, reliable information. If you come to us, you're going to get solid, believable information. And then number three, selected research projects. We do not go out, except the early years, we don't go out and investigate lots of cases. We did in the early years for reasons not worth getting into, historical reasons, but we soon wised up and said, we can't do everything. And so we're not going to try to be MUFON or another group that looks into cases. We're going to look in selectively into cases that are very interesting and possibly, scientifically useful, but not otherwise. And then we're going to work on particular research projects, like my study of the vehicle interference cases that we did.
Is that with nuclear facilities? Is that the one? Or no, vehicle interference, where the electricity goes off in the car or whatever?
Yeah, when the cars were stopped and all that. But so, but we're very eclectic. So, that one is that we were heavily involved in Roswell for years. And in fact, I led the first expedition to the crash site back in '89, looking for debris.
So wait a minute, let me just put a pin in that for a second. You said the crash site as if that's clearly a crash site. And is that now, I don't know what people, tell me if people believe that now in general, openly.
About
that Roswell is a crash site of a UFO.
No, well, I think everybody knows there definitely is at least one crash site. And of course, crash is in quotes, but we don't know what crash, but
But in terms of everyone knowing versus what people will say, I mean, is the DoD now saying that there was a crash site?
The skeptics and the proponents agree there was a crash site.
But will they say that publicly, skeptics and proponents?
Oh, yeah. Everybody, skeptics, because skeptics will say it was caused by a mogul balloon.
Got it.
Okay, but everybody agrees there's at least one place where something, and that's where we went.
Okay.
This is where Bill Brazel, the rancher, found the debris, and I should say Bill Brazel was his son, excuse me. Mac Brazel found the debris, brought it to the sheriff's office and all of that. So anyway, so we did that, and we've looked into abduction cases. We've looked at particular cases like the Coyne helicopter case from 1973 and the Delphos, Kansas trace case, and all and on. And related to that, so, part 3 was research and all that, but maybe there's 3A and 3B. We try to act like but we are a resource for people who want to get seriously involved in the field.
Got it.
And we mentor them in various ways. So, people who you've never heard of, people you've heard of, also they'll come to us and say, yeah, I'm looking into this area. What have you got on this area? What kind of cases you got in this area? What kind of resources should I be reading in this area? There's really nobody else to go to, who can answer that. And that's the kind of thing we do, saw it as a service basically to the serious side of the field.
Got it. So you're almost like a little UFO university.
In a way, we didn't have classes, pre-internet, but in a way, sure.
Yeah.
But we only have held 2 conferences. That was it. So we
public outreach isn't your thing. It's like you come to us if you need us.
Yeah, well, with public outreach, I mean, we give lectures and stuff, but yeah, we're not as by any means as active on public outreach. I mean, we do interviews and do things and write articles, but no, we're a little more insular is probably too strong. We're not hiding from people, but right, but that's our role. There are other, as you know, there are other UFO groups that have a different role. And like you, I think, nicely said, we all have our niche where we try to do what we're doing. And it's not so much step on other people's toes. I think realistically, it's like, we can only do this much. We shouldn't try to do too much.
Yeah.
If you try to do too much, you're not going to be, because nobody has resources. So
Right.
sure, if we had 10 million a year, we'd be doing more, a lot more. So.
Got it. Okay. And so going into the future, so now let's imagine you're going into the future, given the current context. What has your organization thought about in terms of your vision for the future? What could you imagine? Like,
Right.
would you like to do more public outreach, or just keep going, or build an institution? Or
We think about it all the time. So here's one project that is long-term and we think is extremely valuable. If you go to the website, you will find already a fair number of original case reports on the website scanned in. We are scanning our whole set of files, 15 file drawers of case files. And we're pretty, we're 45% of the way there, but there's still a lot to go. The goal is to put everything indexed and searchable online.
wow.
Yeah, right. Wow is right. There's nothing like this. The National UFO Reporting Center is fantastic with Peter Davenport, but it's just these brief case descriptions. Of course, they do what they do.
Right.
There's nowhere else where you can go with, that has something original case reports online. In fact, the closest you can go to is the Fold 3, the commercial site that has the Blue Book records online that are scanned in. And then the NICAP site with Fran Ridge, they have a lot of case files on as well. But basically, we have the most, and we want to get it out there. And we would have again done it if we had enough, because it's all a volunteer effort. So that's one huge thing we think is valuable. It's an interesting, and it brings up an interesting question too. Okay. It's not just Avi Loeb saying this, though he certainly has said it about 1 million times, because I can't turn around without reading another article or seeing him on a podcast. And that's no disrespect to Avi, but man, the guy is everywhere. But basically he said, I don't care about old sightings because the data's not good, not high quality. Of course, I agree. So I want to get new data. I agree. But imagine that we don't make a lot of progress in the next 5 or 10 years learning about UFOs, getting pictures, getting data, but we all still believe that UFOs are a serious problem. Well, then shouldn't we be looking at these old cases for clues and things? Number one. Number two, imagine that we do get information and good photos, and we say, oh, looks like it could be aliens, could be aliens visiting here, but we can't learn much more. They won't engage or an interchange. I think I want to go look at the old cases and see what was going on.
Yeah.
Where
because
were
you're
they?
looking at their behavior. Yeah.
We're looking at their behavior, right?
To get intent.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then number three, just pure science. So much science remains to be done on the UFO problem. I can't, I weep at times from thinking about, how many PhD students we need to work on these problems with these old cases. We don't have time to go into all the list of 100 projects I can think of, but basically you can look at this, like where do they occur, geographic patterns. Some of this has been done with a physicist at Los Alamos back in the 70s who looked at this and found some intriguing correlations with geophysical data with good cases, not balls of light, cases where they were disks. So, the amount of research that can be done that could be very, very revealing in terms of data about the characteristics of the phenomena is almost endless. So for all those reasons, we think old reports are important. Okay.
Yeah, and I would like to say another good argument in terms of this, the amount of science that needs to be done, another good argument for, telling more people about what's known, so that so the scientists can actually get interested and not have to have a security clearance.
Yeah, right.
So, yeah, okay. So backing up, what kind of, I'm getting the impression, and with our conversation, the formal question I'm to ask you is, what kind of UAP related data do you work with? I'm getting the impression largely first person reports. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, at CUFOS, it is with reports like this, exactly. Those, I and a couple of others are involved with projects to gather new data. Like the UFODATA project, like UAPX does, like Avi Loeb wants to do. So we are thinking about project, or they're not a CUFOS project, but CUFOS people are involved with that and working with them, on those projects, because of course we know we need to do hard data.
Yeah.
In fact, for years we have said privately, this pre-New York Times, okay, is that we have enough evidence to show that the UFO problem is a serious scientific problem, but we don't have enough evidence to say that UFOs are alien. I mean, that seems, or another intelligence here, some kind of technology. Yeah, absolutely. There, we think that, of course, but there's not enough to convince the establishment. Again, the phrase I like to use, without getting new hard data. That's what scientists want. They don't care about old cases until you show them in the ways I've described. Oh yeah, we should look at those old cases. But to convince them, you need new hard data.
Okay, so that leads to my next question is, let's imagine your organization, the kind of evidence that comes to your organization, maybe with this UFODATA project, maybe to CUFOS, maybe in combination, a first person report and sensor report, I don't know. But anyway, I don't want to leave you, so strike that. What kind of evidence from UAP reports, including new data, would your organization consider to be good evidence? Let's say your best case scenario. Someone walks in the door, what happens? What is it? What is it like?
The best case scenario, there's a couple of best case scenarios. Let me start actually with the project that, of course, I'm involved with, as are you, Julia, which is the satellite project with SCU.
Yeah.
So imagine that we have first of all, a quality UFO sighting, meaning it's investigated with multiple witnesses, and it's, and so it's a good case. And it was a large black triangle that was seen over, Kansas, someplace. But we also have a satellite photo taken at the same time of this large black triangle, which is so large that we can rule out terrestrial. It's 500 feet across, let's say, and it's and also the witnesses report, well, it didn't just hover there; it actually moved away. In 3 seconds, moved over the horizon. Maybe the satellite didn't catch that, but the witnesses, have that maybe on their cell phone. So what you've got is a confluence of factors that demonstrates, with no doubt, that something real was seen that isn't terrestrial. Now, that's a sighting. We don't have any a spectrum, of the light coming from the object. We don't have other measurements, magnetic fields and all that, okay? But I want to start with what really still is required for most scientists and all that, because they may be intrigued by UFOs, but to get funding, to get more momentum going, you need a sighting or a few sightings where you can say, look at this 500-foot triangle, hovering over the ground and the witnesses say there's no sound.
But see, in that, what you're saying is it has to be an object that doesn't look like a ball of light, right? That doesn't look like a natural phenomenon. Yeah, right. It has to be something that behaves differently from known terrestrially built machinery that flies, right?
Right.
And it has to have characteristics like no sound that make us realize we don't understand how it could exist. I mean, I think that those are sort of the abstract classes. Is that right?
Right. That's right. Okay. Now, this is the kind of sighting you need, again, to be a kind of a breakthrough site. Like the New York Times story was a breakthrough story. You need a few of these real key, events to even, get things going. However, scientifically, that actually doesn't help us much, does it? It's great. We demonstrate that it exists, but scientifically, you do want data on magnetic fields. You want a spectrum. Yeah. You want electric fields. You want gamma ray data, gamma data. You want everything you can get on the sighting. Okay, so that means how do you do that? Well, you have, of course, a machine or machines in the field that are ready to record a UFO that comes nearby. It'd be nice if there was a person there, but if there's 3 of them triangulating, that's the ideal. Okay, is you have machines that can triangulate on something, and they have scientific instruments in them. Of course, scientists put scientific instruments out in machine, things like this all the time, everywhere, under the water, And so UFO comes by, and they all triangulate on it, so we can find it's this space. Here it is, and these machines, unlike the satellites, they track it over time. So they track it when it comes into view, they track it when it leaves. You've got actual a video of this thing, and you've got all the data. And then, of course, I want the data to show something anomalous. If it doesn't show something anomalous, by the way, that's intriguing too. It doesn't help as much, because imagine, in fact, that we've got a machine, and out in my backyard, about 30 feet over there, is a 500-foot triangle. And I'm measuring everything I can about the environment, and the environment doesn't change at all. Nothing changes in the environment. There's just a 500-foot triangle that was here.
Which is anomalous. It's anomalous that would be anomalous.
Yeah,
right?
what that would do is people, our physicists and others would then say, okay, so it's either got to be in its own time-space bubble, or, you start thinking about, right, how can something
or it's some
like
kind
that,
of projection, consciousness projection.
could be a projection, maybe it's exactly, but you start thinking those lines, okay?
Yeah,
so sure, whatever you find,
Is
including
interesting.
nothing, you've learned something,
Right.
okay?
That makes
So
sense.
so there's the answer. That's the other thing.
Okay.
I am interested in balls of light, of course.
Yeah.
But balls of light, like at Hessdalen in Norway and other places,
Yeah.
and they're intriguing, but they aren't as potentially, I think, interesting as, of course, something that's a machine that looks like an object.
I'm interested in all of it. I think there's these different species of things that are flying around that we don't understand. So I am, and they're either flying around out in the physical world, or some of them are flying around in the physical world, and some of them are projections of consciousness. But anyway, we're not here to talk about my little thoughts. What we're here to talk about is this last question. And actually, I hope I can get to the hope and fear question, but just so briefly, what kinds of explanations for UAP reports and data does your organization tend to examine? Like, it sounds like what kind of explanations do you put in piles, these reports, like, oh, this is a this and this is a that?
Yeah, I mean, again, remember that we don't look at, hundreds of reports, okay? In other words, we don't look at, lots of reports and have to, go through them like other groups do. And so we don't have to worry about saying we're going to put them in. So we focus on reports where they're pre-screened, like the ones I mentioned, Delphos and others now, like in the 90s, there was a great sighting in Southwest Michigan where UFOs were picked up on weather radar, of all things, as well as seen by dozens of witnesses. And so we did a very intensive investigation of that. And I assisted with the Tinley Park Triangle in the Chicago area in 2004 and 2005, a large triangular series of lights. They were just lights. Were seen over the southern suburbs here several times, and they remain a mystery. And so we looked into that. They were local. We worked with the MUFON, Illinois MUFON on that one, and so because of that, we don't really have piles as you're asking about. What I will say is simply that let me respond this way though, and this is just personal because, to be honest, I think each of my colleagues at the center is going to have their own take on it. So. But I am open to not only all the possible ideas about what unknown UFOs might be, because that's what we care about, of course, the unknown, the UAPs and UFOs, not the ones we can explain as this, that, and the other thing, including things nobody has ever thought of.
Right.
The universe is strange, really strange. We don't know everything. And so, of course, you have to lean in certain directions. But I really keep an open mind and say, whatever we find is what we're going to find. And I'm not going to leap quickly to say that most UFOs are this, 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 and this. I mean, for those who are of a religious inclination, there are serious people that think that some UFO sightings are caused by demons. And, who am I, if there is a God and there is a, all of that, well, then who's to say there can't be, right? So, so I'm saying that, in my mind, our job is to do science on UFOs and, let the chips fall where they may as we learn what we learn.
I like that. I think that's a scientifically sound approach.
Yeah.
So we have 5 more minutes. I just wanted to try to leave with this question: hopes and fears for what happens now that NASA's got a program, the military, US military is starting to think about things. What are your hopes and fears?
Well, I think I'll start. The fears are that the UFO problem is a very hard problem because of the resources required and because we may be dealing with intelligence. So there's 2 issues involved, which people are kind of aware of, but certainly people newer to the field don't really grasp this. When we were trying to figure out what the Soviets were doing during the Cold War, we often use science to do that, like satellites in space, which were built with science and engineering and took pictures and did other, gathered other data about Soviet systems. So, but what were we doing? Well, we were using science, but we were working against an adversary who was trying to thwart us, of course, in what we were learning, or actively concealing what they were doing. Okay. Is the UFO problem like that? I'd say it's very possible it is, which means it isn't just science. Okay. So, number 1, that was number 2. Number 1, of course, is that because nobody can predict where UFOs are going to occur, trying to study them is enormously difficult. And you have to have equipment everywhere. And people have always underestimated. This is something that's now an aside about driving us crazy. People have said, why haven't you guys made more progress studying UFOs? And I say, name me one other area of science where if you have no resources, you make progress.
Right.
Right? And the answer is there is no area of science where if you have no resources, you make serious progress. And we've had no resources. So, okay.
So what are your hopes?
Yeah. So so I'm worried that people will give up too easily if it turns out that, this is really hard to do. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's my fear. The hope, though, is that, and I don't care who it is, Avi Loeb, UAPX, Ron Oakes, UFODATA project, NASA, the military, that, in the next 5 or 10 years, certainly while I'm still around, that, we get data that shows something really unusual is happening. We were right all along. Yes, I will gloat for a few minutes and say that this is a problem that we actually have to pour resources into because we need to solve this problem. We need to come to grips with this problem. So, of course, that's my hope. I'm not hoping that we're going to solve it all soon, right? I'm just hoping modestly that it will actually become an existing serious scientific problem funded, through the usual sources, mm-hmm. and all the rest.
I think that's a pretty nice circumscribed hope. It's not too you're not trying to compress sort of 50 years of social change and scientific discovery into 1 year. You're just saying maybe we could take it seriously in the next 5 or 10 years. No,
that's right. I'm not looking for disclosure, that all the things that people talk about, I'm not even sure there is much to disclose. Who knows? But I'm just looking for, just let's make the UFO problem part of the scientific, the standard scientific community. It's not laughed out of, out of the halls of science. and you can work on it. You know, because scientists today still remain anonymous. There are people involved with us who let their name be used, and there are people involved with us who won't let their name be used. And, you know, that has to stop. And, you know, that would be progress right there.
Okay, beautiful, well said. All right, thank you so much. Hope to talk
Thanks,
to you
Julie.
again sometime.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's fun. Okay.
Me too.
Great.